Hello Exiles, this is Ryan from Behind Eyes Gaming, and welcome to what is, to some degree at least, my fourth episode in my Kinetic Blast of Clustering Elementalist Zero to Hero journey. What I mean by that is, while recording this episode, I ended up burning out a bit on PoE 1, so I can't really say I've completed this build to a degree that I'm satisfied with. I also wasted a bunch of time on trying to fix a problem that wasn't really a problem and had much easier solutions that were available to me, and would have had me doing maybe not so much of my least favorite content for upwards of 8 to 10 hours if I had picked up on it earlier. So instead of going through my journey in detail, I'll go over what I tried on the build and what I would do differently now and how I would progress further if I planned on playing the character to completion. I'll also briefly be talking about what I was doing instead, which was trying out Torchlight Infinite and Last Epoch, and just a bit of my thoughts on how those games have changed as someone who's played quite a bit of them and then dropped both of them for quite a long time. With Path of Exile 2 rapidly approaching, I'd like to move on to theory crafting a league starter for that, so let's wrap up this journey where I went from zero to hero, but really only on specific types of content, even if I do think the character can eventually become a pretty strong all-rounder. So first, let's get the other games out of the way. If you aren't really interested in my thoughts on those, there'll be timestamps and chapters so you can skip ahead, but honestly, I think if you're interested in how the ARPG scene is evolving, it may interest you even if you don't really play those games yourself. Starting off with Torchlight Infinite, this is a game I really enjoyed, but it had a ton of problems. Starting off, I want to say that it actually did fix my biggest problem with the game, which is the fact that all the characters were not available to play. Previously, you would have a small portion of characters that you could pick through to play, and you would, through passes and daily quests, earn currencies where you could buy a character. However, you'd only earn maybe just enough or a little bit more than enough to buy one character per season. This was made worse by the fact that they would sometimes be releasing multiple new characters per season, making it so you would never actually catch up without paying, and later on it would be even worse for newer players to jump in because they'd be even farther behind the 8 ball if they wanted to have a large variety of characters that they could play with. I don't know if all the characters being playable is permanent or not, but if so, it'll probably be enough to bring me back to try every new season with that alone. Now, one of the ways I would describe PoE 2 up until now is that it's a very engaging game, but it's not very fun. There just wasn't a lot you could be doing at any given time. Of course, it's early access, so that makes sense, and that's being fixed with every single patch. But you could pretty much say the opposite for Torchlight Infinite. It's an extremely fun game, but there's next to no skill expression during play. It's much more about building up your character. You'll pretty much always be either dominating the content until all of a sudden you aren't anymore, and then you just have to figure out why. The combat is either one-shot or be one-shot in many cases, and it still has that old MMO style of boss telegraphing where it has the big red dots on the ground, so minimal skill expression is necessary to actually play the game. I think part of this is because it's meant for mobile play where you're not going to have quite the precision as you would have on PC, but even so, it feels a little clunky. But I do like a lot of other things about it. It's an extremely fun game to play as far as just blasting maps on it, for instance. I like how most of the content actually contributes to character power in some way or another. So whenever you do hit a roadblock, there's always a clear objective you can aim to farm in order to gain character power. You have like candles, which give powerful bonuses, and that's behind one content type. It's a little extra piece of gear you get. You get a little puzzle. It's a square where you fit puzzle pieces on, and they give very powerful bonuses as well. And you get wedges from that same content that drops those, which allow you to put randomly rolled bonuses onto those puzzle pieces. And you can farm that kind of thing as well. It's got a similar to PoE style tree where you can kind of customize your own end game, and you can respec and try new different types of content, and each of those different types of content are going to provide you with either a separate kind of power or a nice good amount of loot or some sort of reward that's specific to them. That makes it a lot more fun to farm and to build up your character and to theory craft. And not only that, but there's all sorts of bosses with very impactful uniques for specific builds that you can farm, and then you can go for big corrupts on those. And corrupts, rather than giving implicits in this, the big thing you want to go for is that you can actually transform one of the affixes on the item into a much more powerful version of those affixes. So that can mean that you could be boss farming, looking for the unique you want, just so you can get just the right perfect corrupt for it. And corrupts are kind of hidden behind their own special content as well. So like I said, it's very fun, but the actual gameplay itself isn't all that engaging. Even things like the sound design aren't as gratifying as like PoE, for instance, which is something you notice playing like an ice character. The shatter sound effect is more of like a delicate little tink rather than the nice crunchy satisfying sound you get in PoE and PoE2. I think the sound design leaves a lot to be desired, which it may not be important for that many people, but I for one really like the shattering sound effects. In fact, I once played an idle game about shattering bottles, specifically because I really liked the shattering sound they made when you clicked on them. I played it for like 10 hours straight, based almost exclusively just on the sound effects alone. So for me, apparently that is something that's somewhat important, at least. I'd like to talk about Last Epoch next as well. Just been playing that for the last 2 days or so. Last Epoch was already a pretty great game, and honestly, it's only gotten better, but it was lacking a little bit in the random content to be encountered. It felt a little dry. They too have fixed this issue, of course. This was inevitable. It was a newer game, and since they got full release and they started putting out their seasons, or whatever you want to call it, they have added a bunch of new content to the game, and honestly, it feels great now. Going through the different zones, you'll run into a bunch of different random events, just like in PoE. Honestly, if it wasn't for PoE 2 coming up so shortly after the release, I'd probably be putting in a solid month or so playing Last Epoch and possibly making some videos on it, because I'm really enjoying my time in that game. But sadly, the timing is going to limit me to a couple more days, more than likely. Maybe it's something I can revisit after a month or so if PoE 2 doesn't really get a firm grip on my soul like I expect it to. Last Epoch is now pretty rich with content, and probably hands down has the best crafting system in all of the action RPGs I've ever played, at least in my opinion. They really nailed gearing overall, I'd say. The implicits on items are really interesting and have you considering different pieces of gear, even if some are higher tiers than others, maybe having a higher base armor, but because of the implicits on weapons and armors, you get to consider that. Not only that, but they have drop-only tiers. You can craft up to tier 5 tiers, but then you can get 6, 7, and now even 8. 6 and 7 through drops, and 8 through a special crafting currency now, which can make it a lot more excited. These are called exalted items, and it's really cool to farm for these and try to make cool items out of them. And you can also slam exalted affixes onto legendaries or uniques or whatever they're called in this game. So there's a variety of ways to alter items in pretty wild ways, and they keep adding more as well. The level of determinism you get to make good enough items for your character while still leaving open tons of room for improvement feels really great. It means you can get right into playing the character the way you want to play it with the stats you want, and then you are still always seeking out those meaningful upgrades. The feel of combat is probably right around the level of PoE 1 for me as well. It's a little bit less, of course, than PoE 2, PoE 2 probably being by far the most refined in the space as far as pure combat feel, but it's definitely much more gratifying than Torchlight Infinite. I'd put it right in the middle as far as the prominent action RPGs in my mind go. The sound effects as well, since we've talked about that, really work. The fight animations feel a little bit more meaningful. They do still have the weird ground dots, which kind of takes me out of it a little bit. It feels like they maybe aren't confident in their animation and sound cues to telegraph big attacks. I feel like they could probably drop them. They're not a mobile game. They could simply put voice lines for bosses, or simply put, more telegraphed attack animations. And I think the game would feel a lot more immersive that way. And you would feel like, memorizing boss patterns and stuff would feel a lot more gratifying, I think. Overall, I think both of these games have really stepped up and will be my go-to side games when I need a break from PoE and or PoE 2. And it's a good thing too, because there's no way in hell Blizzard is ever getting a dime of my money again after charging $20 to play the game 4 days early and locking any meaningful gameplay updates behind mediocre paid expansions. We have so many other good options in the space right now that are actually capable of making a good game and won't try to squeeze every penny out of you for the privilege of getting pretty much what I would consider a steaming pile of dog shit dressed up in horse armor. Okay, so back to PoE, now that we've got that rant over. We have the good old Kinetic Blast of Clustering Elementalist. I felt a bit stuck at Pinnacles and even some Guardians were feeling tough, so I decided to try a few creative options. I thought that perhaps scaling with Hatred would be good, and that would also allow me to use Trinity, giving me more penetration along with the more damage multiplier. Trinity's always good if you can fit it. But I ended up having to reserve more of my mana to do that, and with my already mediocre defenses, losing a bunch of mana, which was contributing to my total health pool, was a pretty bad move. I was doing way more damage for sure, but I was also dying almost constantly to pretty much everything above yellow maps, so that wasn't something I could do long term. It was really the definition of just don't get hit, and I couldn't stay that way for long. So I ended up getting a few gear upgrades over time, a few pieces of gear that would be excellent for other characters aside from this one as well, some 6 links that I could actually craft onto, for instance, but it didn't quite push me over the hump, so I decided to go with a different approach. I went back to the lab, something I had already spent a couple hours on this character farming, 2 or 3 at least, and I personally really don't like running lab, but I thought it was worth doing at the time. My plan was to get Power Siphon of Archmage and run Locust Mines with it to dramatically improve my single target. Not a bad idea, right? Well, wrong, for a couple of reasons, but let's address the biggest reason first. And that reason is I am one lucky SOB. I mean, unreasonably lucky in this case. I spent about 7 hours, often with 2 or 3 uses of the Divine Font, trying to find this stupid gem. Over and over, I would run through, get the Dark Shrines until I got an extra use of the Divine Font, and I'd plug my gem in only to once again not see Power Siphon of the Archmage. I got multiple copies of every other blue transfigured gem. I probably would have made about a dozen divines on trade selling the meta ones at the time, as I ended up getting half a dozen copies of a couple of different ones that were worth 200, 250 chaos in trade at the time. But as a solo self-found player, I had to watch helplessly as I felt locked into this miserable content until I finally was able to get the one gem that would fix all of my issues. Whether or not that was true, well, I guess you already know the answer. I've heavily implied what the answer is at this point. But after I finally made it out of that hellscape of a labyrinth, I respect and went out, and honestly, it wasn't bad in most cases. I do feel like the single target was a lot better, but the scaling of the skill isn't that good, and with the damage effectiveness nerf in this patch, it was quite a bit weaker as a mind skill. I might have had better luck just using it as an attack, but at that point, what's the point? I may as well just be going back to KB of clustering. I wanted the Locust Mines to be overriding the projectiles, only allowing them to all target one single enemy after all, and that's the whole reason I did it. So I got through my first Shaper and Elder using this method, and quite a lot of Guardians, but it felt pretty much way worse on everything that wasn't a boss. So eventually I just swapped back, and guess what? The upgrades I made at the time, and just going to purely focus on lightning conversion and really locking in the strength from mana scaling and not trying to do anything fancy, all of a sudden I was easily able at least to do the Guardians and Shaper and Elder with Kinetic Blast of Clustering with 0 problems. Shaper and Elder at this point were quite easy, and although Kinetic Blast of Clustering has another fatal weakness in that I can't see what's going on in my screen, I was bursting them down quick enough, which is a big problem with boss fights, leading to me losing my Uber Elder. One of the other factors is that I'm relying on, for physical defense, my Elementalist Ascendancy that converts the enemy's damage into fire, physical damage into fire damage, which has helped me, along with my mercenary having the belt that Calm's Binding that converts nearby enemies physical damage to fire. I'm converting a total of 65% physical to fire. So with these two things in combination, regular Shaper, I could actually survive a Shaper Slam pretty easily actually. But with the Uber Elder, sometimes Shaper would be invulnerable to damage and I could only damage Elder. And if I can't see what's going on in my screen, I might accidentally tank a Shaper Slam, which happened a bunch of times. And because I'm not able to hit the Shaper, I'm not able to ignite the Shaper and thus take a bunch of damage. So I lost my first Uber Elder fight, and at that point I wanted to play less and less, and I just didn't want to play that much anymore. So I kind of slowly started just logging in, doing a couple maps, logging out, and then I wouldn't log in for a whole day, and then I'd log in every other day, and before I knew it, I just wasn't playing anymore, and that's kind of where I left this off. So what would I have done differently, and what would be my next steps? Well, I certainly wouldn't have spent 7 more hours in lab, that's for sure. So if you were thinking about switching over, the Locust Mines Power Siphon of the Archmage just doesn't feel all that good, and probably not better than Kinetic Blast of Clustering, maybe a little more so for a single target, but for everything else just much worse. So I would say KB of Clustering was just fine. I just needed to get a couple of levels and work on my gear. So I really should have just worked to grind out those levels, and then I should have honed in on using the Recombinator to craft better and better gear after farming up all of my high level bases, maybe even throwing in some of my tier 17s, not with the intention of beating the bosses because I don't know that I necessarily could have, but just to get those higher level item bases, and then recombinating and crafting on those. I also really should have focused more on doing destructive play, and in particular doing Uber Elder. Even though the fight was tough for me, had I leveled up and geared up a little bit better, I would have had a better time with it, and I could have farmed up an Indigon, which would have pushed my damage much higher and would have made everything a lot easier. Also, by doing destructive play, I would have been working towards getting awakened gems, including huge ones like awakened elemental damage with attacks and awakened fork. I can combine that with doing the beasts whenever they came up in Kirak missions in order to potentially re-roll awakened gems that I wasn't going to use, and potentially getting either one of those or maybe another one that might be useful would skyrocket my damage. This was a very simple strategy I could have been doing that would have had the biggest impact on my progress while pushing towards my last Void Stones. Of course, Uber Elder getting me one, and then by doing destructive play, I'd be getting Maven Shards as well. Unlocking the map sustain needed to do pretty much whatever strategy I wanted to do going forward from then. I also could have been doing memory tears more. Not only does essence crafting memory threaded gear yield some pretty great stuff, I've done a little bit of that and got some really nice gear through that method, but doing Incarnation of Dread in particular would have given me a chance to get Whispers of Infinity, which would allow me to scale chaos damage. I then could have used my Glove Influence and a Chaos Mastery to convert a bunch of physical damage to chaos and put Withering Touch support on my attack, which would have given me Fizz as extra chaos and a chance to wither on hit, and basically double dip my mana skip scaling into chaos damage, and I could have kept my big shock while also getting wither as well. This probably would have given me a ton of damage, especially when combined with Indigon. The amulet is actually extremely common, drops 50% according to PoE Wiki from the Incarnation of Dread, and it synergizes with the build so well that it was a waste not to try and farm it, but I didn't really see it until I had basically already burned out of the league. So don't make that mistake, go farm the Incarnation of Dread. All you have to do is allocate the one that makes Incarnation of Dread more common on the Atlas tree and makes it so you're more likely to get memory tears, and just repeatedly spam through those, and then in between doing all of your other maps, probably doing destructive play. Other than that, I could have done some Magic Find and Gwenin to try to find a Cloak of Defiance. I never actually dropped one. Then I could have 6-linked it, which would have saved me 5 points on the tree, which could have allowed me to push up either my damage or defenses or both quite a bit. I also could have tried out Lore Weave, which I was actually working towards and was very close to, which would have allowed me to use a different shield, as I was running a Sapphil's Frame just to get my max resist up a little bit higher since I was lacking Spell Suppress. I even could have gotten Spell Suppress on my shield had I done that, and then maybe gone with like a couple of suppress points with the saved points and you know, something along those lines. Although I guess since I wouldn't have had Cloak of Defiance, I wouldn't have had to bind over matter in order to save those points. So I would have had to allocate some things into Spell Suppress in order to do that and get Lucky Suppress. Overall, I feel like there was a lot I could do still. I did very much feel like a hero when it came to clear speed. Anything like Legion, Expedition, Breach, and any other mass enemy killing content, I felt very, very strong in. And then I ended up feeling weak in content that I unfortunately needed the most to progress to get the optimal farming experience, which feels a little bit like a shame since it didn't really need to be that way if I had just planned a little bit better and didn't waste so much time trying to find an easy way out. But that is what is likely to be my last PoE 1 video for a little bit. With PoE 2 coming out very shortly, I'm looking forward to that, and I hope you follow my journeys there as I try out the new act and all of the new content on offer there. I hope you enjoyed this series, even if the conclusion was delayed massively and a little bit anticlimactic. This has been Ryan from Behind Eyes Gaming, and I will see you next time. Bye.